Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something that seems straightforward at first glance. A U.S. victory declared over the Houthis in Yemen.
Right, but as often happens when you start digging, the reality is, well, a lot messier.
Exactly. And pretty surprising, too. So for those of you tracking current events, maybe for UPSC prep, or just to understand, modern conflict, this is important stuff.
Absolutely. We're drawing mainly on reporting from the New York Times, which the Eurasian Times also picked up on. It paints a fascinating picture.
Our mission today is really to unpack what actually happened, what this victory really means, and what it tells us about modern warfare without getting totally lost in the weeds.
And the starting point is pretty stark. Get this. The U.S. apparently spent over $1 billion in just 2 months bombing.
$1 billion, and the stated aim was simple enough: stop the Houthis from hitting U.S. assets in the Red Sea.
Okay, so let's talk about that victory announcement. It came May 6th, I believe. Trump declared victory, promised the bombing campaign would end. Sounds conclusive.
Sounds conclusive, yeah. But the reports, the ones we're looking at, they suggest something different. Despite all that bombing, all that money.
The Houthis kept firing. They were still targeting U.S. assets. So that idea of achieving, complete air superiority, it didn't really happen.
No. It seems like they just couldn't shut down the Houthi attacks completely, which, when you think about it, says a lot about this kind of warfare.
It really does. The gap between the declaration and the operational reality is significant. And it leads us to the costs, not just financial, the actual losses.
Right. Let's get into those. We know about the drones. At least 7 MQ-9 Reapers were lost.
Yeah, and those are sophisticated machines. We're talking around $30 million each.
So that's, what, over $200 million just in drones?
Easily.
Yeah.
And that's not all. There were also 2 fighter jets lost F-18 Super Hornets.
Super Hornets. Much more expensive, right? Upwards of $65 million apiece.
That's the ballpark, yeah. And the way they were lost is also revealing. Well, one went down after the aircraft carrier, the USS Harry S. Truman, had to make a really sharp, hard turn to actually dodge incoming Houthi missiles.
Wow. So the threat was real enough to force evasive action from a massive carrier, leading to a jet loss.
Exactly. It shows the pressure they were under. The other FA-18 loss was more technical, a failed cable catch during landing. Still, it highlights the risks involved in these high-intensity carrier ops.
Okay, so drones, Super Hornets, but the really eye-opening part from the Times reporting, the bit the Eurasian Times flagged too, involves near misses.
This is where it gets quite frankly shocking. They nearly lost an F-16
And
and an F-35.
a stealth fighter.
An F-35 nearly hit by Houthi air defenses. Well, that changes the conversation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I mean, the F-35 is supposed to be the pinnacle, right? Stealthy, advanced. The idea that a group like the Houthis could almost score a hit.
It raises serious questions. The New York Times actually quoted U.S. officials on this. Yeah, they did. It said, let me find the exact wording, several American F-16s and an F-35 fighter jet were nearly struck by Houthi air defenses, making real the possibility of American casualties, multiple U.S. officials said.
Making real the possibility of American casualties. That's the key phrase.
That's the nightmare scenario for any commander, especially losing a pilot may be captured. And specifically with the F-35, if the Houthis could track it well enough to almost hit it, what does that imply about its stealth against, say, more advanced adversaries like China or Russia?
It definitely takes some of the shine off that invincible tag. And you mentioned casualties. That seems to have been a major factor in pulling back. But wasn't there also some kind of deal, an off-ramp offered by the Houthis?
Yes, that's another crucial piece. According to the reports, the Houthis basically offered a deal. They'd stop hitting U.S. ships specifically, though, importantly, not ships linked to Israel, if the U.S. stopped the bombing campaign.
Interesting. So a sort of limited ceasefire targeted just at the U.S. Navy assets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the reporting suggests that the Trump administration saw this as a way out, a chance to avoid getting bogged down in a longer, potentially much costlier fight, especially with the risk of casualties or capture looming.
So stepping back, for someone maybe starting international relations or, prepping for UPSC where strategic analysis is key, what are the big takeaways here about modern warfare?
Well, first, it's a textbook example of asymmetric warfare, isn't it? You have a technologically less advanced group posing a significant challenge, inflicting real costs on a superpower.
It really highlights the limitations of relying purely on high-tech air power.
Absolutely, and it chips away at that image, that sort of sheen of Western fighter jets being untouchable.
The reports mention this isn't in isolation either, right? There have been questions raised about other advanced jets in other conflicts.
Yeah, the Eurasian Times piece likely touched on this. There have been reports, some contested, of course, about Rafale losses in India, maybe linked to Chinese tech, and obviously F-16s facing tough challenges in Ukraine. It adds to a broader picture of evolving air defense threats.
So the F-35 near miss isn't just a one-off anomaly, it's part of a trend.
It could be seen that way.
Hmm?
It certainly feeds into doubts about the absolute invincibility of even stealth platforms against increasingly sophisticated or maybe just cleverly deployed defenses. And think about the implications for future sales.
Right. Countries considering the F-35, India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, were mentioned. They must be watching this closely.
You'd have to assume so.
Hmm.
If the Houthis can pose a threat, potential buyers will ask hard questions about its effectiveness against peer adversaries.
What are the Houthis actually using, though? How did they manage to get so close to these advanced jets?
It's thought to be a mix, likely mobile surface-to-air missile systems, SAMs. Being mobile makes them really hard to find and destroy preemptively.
Not fixed sites you can just bomb.
Exactly. Plus, potentially electronic warfare tactics to jam or confuse systems. As for the hardware, speculation includes Iranian-derived systems, maybe things like the Sayad-2C or Sansol, possibly older Russian SA-6 missiles too. Adaptability seems key.
So mobile systems, possibly EW, a mix of missile types, and enough skill to nearly bag an F-35.
It seems so. And that brings us back to the U.S. calculation. The cost, the lack of clear victory, the near misses.
And the fear of that nightmare scenario, losing a pilot.
That seems to have been a major driver. The strategic fallout, the propaganda value for the Houthis of capturing an American pilot, that would be immense, far outweighing the benefits of continued bombing, perhaps.
So putting it all together for our listeners, especially those thinking about this for UPSC or just staying informed, the declared victory was, let's say, not the full story.
Not by a long shot. It was a costly campaign, didn't achieve its primary goal of stopping all attacks, and crucially revealed vulnerabilities.
Vulnerabilities in advanced U.S. air power when faced with a determined, asymmetric opponent. The near loss of the F-16 and especially the F-35 is the big headline here, really.
It's a stark illustration of the perils of modern conflict, and how the technological edge isn't always decisive.
So, a final thought, perhaps, for you to mull over. What does this episode tell us about the future? How might it reshape military planning, arms purchases, maybe even geopolitical calculations?
It definitely gives strategists a lot to think about regarding the effectiveness and survivability of expensive high-tech assets in these kinds of environments.
Yeah.
Understanding these dynamics is vital.
Absolutely. For anyone tracking current affairs, especially for exams like the UPSC, this is a really important case study.
It touches on asymmetric warfare, geopolitics, military tech, international relations. Lots of relevant themes.
Indeed. So if you found this deep dive useful, drawing on that New York Times reporting highlighted by the Eurasian Times, please do give us a like, subscribe for more analysis like this.
And definitely leave a comment if you have questions or your own take on this. We'd love to hear it.
We always appreciate the engagement. Just to reiterate, our discussion was based on that reporting in the New York Times as covered by the Eurasian Times.
Crucial sources for understanding this complex situation.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.